of the biggest questions people always have about relationships is you'll always get someone that will say relationships don't work anymore. Sex is too easy to find. No one wants a relationship anymore. And I talked in another video about the age of confusion, about living through the relationship age of confusion, where the old ways have broken down and we haven't got a new way to replace it yet. And so what confusion does is confusion, when you stay confused and seems to be no answer, people get frustrated. When people get frustrated, they start to despair. And when you despair for long enough, then you start to become bitter. And so when you're looking at behavior and dating, most of this comes from confusion, despair, bitterness, and frustration. So I want to talk today about, okay, how do you make a relationship work? And I think the person who's best addressed this is Helen Fisher. And Helen Fisher is an anthropologist who studied hundreds or maybe even thousands of different cultures of how their like style and format and structure of their relationships. And she studied relationships over history as well. And she's also studied biologically. And so what she proposes from her research is that fundamentally humans have three drives. We have the sex drive, which is to get us out meeting people. But we also have a romantic drive. It's where we want someone to feel special, where we want that intimate, like, when you meet someone and you're really excited about them and you're thinking about them and you're excited when a text comes through, that's the romantic drive. And she says what that does is the sex drive gets you out interested in people. The romantic drive makes you focus on one. And then there's a drive for deep companionship. Like, we want someone, a life partner that we can rely on. Someone we feel has got our back. And so I think she addresses this question really well of, do people still want relationships? Because what she says is we have basic biological drives, and those drives don't change because our society has changed. So yes, we have online dating. Yes, we have a different world than we had a century ago. However, biologically, we are still the same as the caveman, because biological evolution takes thousands and thousands of years. So what she says is how we do dating has changed, but the fact that we want a relationship hasn't changed. So I think what's happened is that people have got this confusion with the relationship model that we have, which leads to frustration and all of these things. So I want to talk about the average relationship. So there's lots of research on the life cycle and lifespan of a relationship. And so depending on the research, the graph's going to change. But on average, when there's research on marriages, there's this kind of graph, and you've got satisfaction, or how happy you are, how satisfied you are in the relationship. And then you've got the time, so like as time goes on. And so the usual graph of, say, a new marriage goes something like that. And forgive my drawing, it might not be exactly, but it's that kind of downward slope. So why? What's going on? Well, I think when it starts to drop here, when it starts to drop here is really about, this phase is the honeymoon stage. So the honeymoon stage is that kind of when Helen Fisher talks about the romantic drive, it lasts somewhere from about 6 months to about 3 years. And what that's about is she proposes that it's like 3 years is long enough to have a baby, bring it up, and so it's sort of able to cope without two parents. So in the average relationship, once that biological drive is dropped down, then we're just dropping right down. And that's because we're not really building in the structures and the behavior and the attitudes to the relationship that cause it to go from romantic love to deep companionate love. So we can see that there's a sharp decline. And what's really happening here is that you've got you like a couple after a year or a couple of years stop dating generally. They stop being curious and interested in the other person because they think they know everything about the person. And so life takes over. You've got a big mortgage, you're working long hours, you're stressed, you're arguing about who's taken out the bins, why is that washing on the floor, why is the toilet seat up. All of these things cause friction. And if you don't have a way of resolving that friction, then however loving you felt, it soon fades. So when a relationship ends, it usually ends because people have grown apart, because they've lost trust, because they're incompatible. Well, a couple is incompatible. A couple become incompatible here. They're not incompatible here. So that's not really about not being compatible. It's about about losing the connection. So couples break because of being incompatible, because they grew apart, which is really another way of saying they lost the connection, because it just becomes unbearable. It becomes full of arguments. Someone cheats. There's like a loss of trust. It just stops being worthwhile. Someone gets into addiction or depression or something like that. And what's really happening is those things aren't the thing that broke the relationship. The downward slope is what broke the relationship. Because even if it's like when someone cheats, most of the time, it's not because this other person was so dazzling and irresistible. It's because they feel that they're not getting enough attention. It's because they feel that they can justify it. It's because they feel they're not getting enough respect. It's because they worry that the other person's doing that. So what really breaks the relationship is long before the actual event that ends the relationship. And so you see, really, there's a line. And this is where a relationship goes into danger. And it goes into danger because the people in it aren't feeling so good. And sometimes it comes as a shock because someone is quite happy with how the relationship is. And they might be up here and not really trying. But they don't realize that the other person is down here because they were happy with how it was. So above the line is where you become enriched by the relationship. So let's look at what would happen if when you were here, you were able to maintain that. And you would have ups and downs because stuff happens. But what if you could more or less maintain that straight line? What would it take? Well, really, we're in relationships ultimately so that they enrich our lives, because we want to love, to be loved. We want to feel seen, we want to feel safe, we want to feel supported, and we want to have our needs met. So I think that we need to look at relationships in a lot of the same way that we look at how do we keep our body healthy. We keep our body healthy with exercise. We keep our body healthy with enough sleep. We keep our body healthy by getting the right nutrients. And while we have, like, if we don't have vitamin C, we're going to have scurvy. If we don't have iron, we're going to become anemic or suffer consequences. We get diseases when we become deficient. Emotionally, equally, we need certain things. We need emotional nutrients to keep us feeling good. So we need to have our needs met. We need to feel safe. We need to feel that we're important. We need to feel respected. We need to feel trusted. All of these things. And so if we have those, we're going to feel good about ourselves. And so we're going to feel good about our partner. And we're going to want to be in the relationship because the relationship gives us more than not being in a relationship. And ultimately, it's not about you're not lovable, you're not beautiful enough, or any of these things. It's about, does the other person feel great when they're with you? Because if they don't, the relationship's going to break. And it might break because they cheat. It might break because they just leave. It might break because they'll go off doing something because you'll be so distanced and you'll end up with so many arguments. But ultimately, it's about nutrition, emotional nutrition. And so I believe we need to build deliciously nutritious relationships. And this is how you go from the sex drive to the romantic drive to the deep companionate love that we are all biologically craving.